Friedrich Nietzsche didn't believe in fixing your old self. He believed in destroying it, burning it to the ground, walking away from everything you've been taught to hold sacred, your habits, your masks, your borrowed morals, so you can become something entirely new. Man is something that shall be overcome, he wrote, not improved, not managed, overcome. If that feels violent, it should. Because transformation isn't polite. It's not a morning routine. It's war against your former self. The person you've been, the one who avoids conflict, who follows the crowd, who craves comfort over truth. That version of you wasn't built to lead. It was built to survive, to blend in, to obey. But survival isn't living, and comfort isn't growth. Nietzsche saw it clearly. If you want to live a life that's truly yours, not a hand-me-down version of someone else's expectations, then you need to let that version of you die. You can't become unstoppable by editing the self you built in fear. You have to create a self built on power, on discipline, on inner fire. If you're done negotiating with mediocrity, subscribe now. Because what we're talking about isn't self-help. It's self-annihilation. The death of the obedient self. The rise of something wild, clear, and untouchable. Nietzsche called this the path of the Ubermensch. Not a Superman in the comic book sense, but a man who breaks the chain of inherited values. Who doesn't look for permission to live, but invents meaning through action. He doesn't chase applause. He doesn't flinch when misunderstood. He stands alone. Not because he wants to, but because he's willing to. He knows that if you want to create your own values, you will be hated for it. And he doesn't care. But you don't get there by reading books or reciting quotes. You get there by burning. Everything you thought you had to be. Every version of yourself you maintained to feel safe. Everything that made you acceptable, likable, soft, predictable. Everything that earned approval but cost you your edge. Burn it all. Burn it. Stand in the ash, and then begin. Destruction isn't chaos, it's clarity. Nietzsche knew that to build a new self, the old one must be seen for what it really is, a defense mechanism, a social invention, a fragile shell stitched together by years of compromise. He didn't ask you to rebel for rebellion's sake. He asked you to see what you've been blindly obeying. Who taught you what strength means? Who told you what success should look like? Whose voice is still whispering in your decisions? Most people live as echoes. They repeat the values of their parents, their culture, their teachers, without ever stopping to ask, do I actually believe this? Or have I just never questioned it? Nietzsche called this living in bad faith. He warned that a man who fails to challenge his inheritance becomes a slave to it. He may look free, sound smart, play successful, but inside he's just performing, just obeying old ghosts. To burn the old you means dragging those ghosts into the light. It means facing the internal noise and asking, whose life am I really living? It means realizing that most of what you call personality is just adaptation, strategy, survival. But now, survival isn't the goal. Becoming is. And becoming demands risk. It demands discomfort. You will lose people. You will disappoint expectations. But that's the price of authenticity. Nietzsche knew it. He lived it. And he never apologized for it. Because once you've tasted the power of self-invention, you never want to go back to obedience. You stop asking what's allowed. You start asking what's true. Burning the old you doesn't start with motivation. It starts with disgust. Raw, uncomfortable, unshakable disgust. Nietzsche believed that transformation begins the moment you can no longer stand your own weakness. Not because someone else criticizes you, but because you finally see it for what it is. Not a personality quirk, not a phase, but a betrayal of your own potential. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. That's when everything starts to shift. You begin to notice every excuse you make, every lie you whisper to keep your comfort intact, every time you agree just to be liked. You notice how you bite your tongue when you should speak, how you hold back to avoid making waves, how you've become a specialist in the art of shrinking, all to protect the illusion that you're fine, that you're good, that you're noble. But Nietzsche would call that cowardice dressed as virtue. He had no patience for weakness hidden behind manners. What looks like humility is often just fear with good PR. And then something deeper sets in, a kind of spiritual nausea. The real moment of transformation isn't when you decide to grow. It's when the sickness of staying the same becomes unbearable, when you can't stomach your own patterns anymore, when the thought of repeating another year like the last one feels like a kind of slow death. That's when the fire starts. That's when the false self starts to crack. But here's the part most people miss. When that fire catches, don't try to manage it. Don't try to shape it into a more palatable form of change. Let it rage. Let it destroy what was never meant to survive. Don't try to salvage your old coping mechanisms. Don't protect your old image. Let the flame consume everything that made you small. Because what rises from that fire, if you have the stomach to stay inside it long enough, will be something forged, not fabricated. Something unrecognizable to the version of you that needed approval to feel whole. That new self won't wait for permission. It won't beg to be understood. It won't apologize for its clarity. It will exist on its own terms, and it will never fit back into the box you once called home. Most people think change means adding. Add habits, add knowledge, add new goals. But Nietzsche understood something deeper. Real transformation begins with subtraction, with the things you stop doing, the beliefs you drop, the masks you rip off, the lies you stop telling yourself. You don't become unstoppable by stacking more onto a broken foundation. You become unstoppable when you shatter the parts of yourself that were never yours to begin with. Start here. Stop calling weakness humility. Stop calling comfort peace. Stop calling avoidance patience. Those are just words we use to protect our fear. And fear is the one thing you can't build on. Nietzsche warned that when you build your life on fear, you create a cage, one that looks responsible, even admirable, but it's still a cage. And what's worse is, you hold the key, but you're too afraid to use it. That's why subtraction matters. You remove what no longer serves the self you are becoming. You remove the opinions of people who never built anything themselves. You remove the guilt that keeps you loyal to old roles, old expectations. You remove the voice in your head that whispers, "Stay small." What's left? Space, fire, potential, the raw material of a new identity. And that's when the work begins. Not of adding, but of forging. Who you become isn't found. He's created. And he's created in the fire you used to run from. The fire of subtraction, the fire of walking away from the version of you that was never built to rise. You cannot become unstoppable if you keep negotiating with your limits. Nietzsche called compromise the enemy of greatness. Not because it's weak, but because it's subtle. It wears the mask of logic, balance, maturity. But underneath, it's fear. Fear dressed in strategy. And if you don't call it out, it becomes your default. Think about it. Every time you almost take the leap into a harder path, a deeper truth, a bolder move, your mind whispers, maybe not yet. Maybe I should wait until I'm more ready, more stable, more supported. But Nietzsche would have told you, that voice isn't caution. It's cowardice pretending to be wisdom. The old you wants comfort, it wants safety, It wants the illusion of growth without the pain of transformation. So it will bargain. It will try to keep some of the chains in exchange for small freedoms. But the man who wants to rise cannot live like that. You don't ascend by keeping your old identity on life support. You cut it off. This is where most people stop. Not because they can't keep going, but because they refuse to let go. They want to evolve while keeping the same friends, the same lifestyle, the same emotional habits. But that's not rebirth. That's costume change. If you want to be unstoppable, you need to become non-negotiable. Decide what must die, and make no exceptions. Because every exception is a doorway back to the version of you that kept you average. You want to burn the old you? Understand something first. Fire isn't selective. It doesn't just take what you hate. It takes what you're still attached to. The habits that brought you comfort. The roles that gave you identity. The relationships that survived because you stayed predictable. Nietzsche warned that real transformation isolates you. Not because people abandon you, but because they don't recognize who you've become. You'll lose friends who loved the weaker version of you. You'll feel the silence of not being understood. That's the price of fire. Not everyone can stand the heat you start to give off when you stop apologizing for your strength. When you no longer shrink for anyone. When you stop translating yourself to be digestible. This is the part no one wants to talk about. The pain of clarity, the grief of rebirth. But Nietzsche embraced it. He knew that becoming who you are meant to be doesn't just cost your past. It costs your comfort, your circle, your sense of safety. And still, he said, do it anyway. Because once you walk through that fire, once you let go of being liked, of being understood, of being manageable, you don't just become stronger, you become free. Truly free, and there is nothing more dangerous than a person who no longer needs approval to exist. The old you doesn't just die quietly. It echoes. It lingers in your head with familiar doubts. Are you sure? What if they leave? What if you're wrong? Nietzsche understood this psychological trap. He called it the ghost of morality, the leftover programming that still pulls at you long after you've rejected it. The voice that says freedom is dangerous. The whisper that tells you to be smaller, safer, easier to love. But that echo is not your conscience. It's your conditioning. And until you recognize that, you'll mistake guilt for truth. You'll confuse fear with intuition. You'll hear that voice and think it's wisdom, when really, it's the same voice that kept you chained for years. To kill the echo, you don't argue with it. You outgrow it. You act in ways that make the old doubts irrelevant. You take bold steps, make hard decisions, and let your new self speak louder than the voices trying to drag you back. This is how the fire continues to burn, not by force, but by momentum. The echo fades the more you build a life that contradicts it. And with every day you live outside the lines you used to follow, that voice loses power. Until one day, it's silent. Not because it gave up, but because you stopped listening. The real you doesn't speak in guilt. It speaks in clarity. You'll know the difference when you hear it. And when you do, trust it. That's the voice you were never meant to silence. Once the fire has done its work, you're not left with nothing. You're left with space, raw, open, terrifying space. This is where most people panic. They've destroyed the old identity but haven't built the new one yet. They mistake the emptiness for failure. But Nietzsche would call this your most powerful moment. Because now, for the first time, what you build is truly yours. Not a patchwork of external expectations, not a mask for social approval, something real, forged in fire. This silence, this blank canvas, is your liberation. No more inherited values, no more secondhand beliefs, no more obedience to scripts that never fit you. You begin to choose, deliberately, ruthlessly, who you are becoming. You define your principles, not based on guilt, but on truth. You build discipline not because someone told you to, but because you've seen what happens when you live without it. You don't just follow structure, you create it. You start to speak, not to impress, but because your voice finally belongs to you. And it echoes with clarity, not performance. This is the work, not aesthetic changes, not external milestones, but soul architecture. The inner redesign of a life that once bent to everyone else's rhythm. Nietzsche believed this was the beginning of becoming the Ubermensch. Not a fantasy figure, but a man who lives by his own law. A man who shapes his reality, not through domination of others, but through mastery of himself. A man who is no longer defined by what he reacts to, but by what he chooses to become. You begin to understand why the destruction had to happen, why the burn was necessary. Because only now can you see how much of you was borrowed, imitated, inherited. The fire didn't take your identity. It took your imitation of one. And in its place, there's room to build something indestructible. If you've come this far, the fire didn't destroy you. It revealed you. Now build what can't be burned. Build what scares the world but strengthens your soul. And don't look back. You're not meant to walk through fire and go back to who you were. You're meant to become the fire. That's what Nietzsche meant when he said, "One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star." That chaos, that hunger, that burning edge you've been trying to tame, it's not your weakness. It's your fuel. Stop managing it. Start mastering it. The old you was built to keep the peace. The new you isn't interested in peace that requires you to lie about who you are. The new you creates friction, demands truth, refuses to perform. And people will call that arrogance. They'll call it cold. That's how you know it's working. Because when you no longer explain your presence, when you no longer dim your words, when your life is dictated by vision, not fear, you become untouchable. And that's the goal. Not just to change, but to become so grounded in who you are that the world no longer gets to edit you. That's when you stop waiting. Stop hesitating. That's when you burn through indecision like it never existed. You don't ask for freedom anymore. You embody it. When the old you is gone, really gone, what's left isn't peace, not at first. What's left is space, silence, a void where your excuses used to live. There's no map, no script, just the cold, open territory of possibility. Nietzsche never promised comfort. He promised confrontation. And this final stage? This is where most people turn back. They rebuild their chains, call them commitments. They start over, but softer, quieter, safer. They call it maturity, but it's just a slower kind of surrender. But if you've come this far, you know the truth. There's no going back. You've seen too much. You've let too much burn. You've watched yourself walk through fire and come out breathing. And that memory, that raw, defiant moment when you refuse to break, it will follow you. It will haunt you if you ever try to settle again. Because you now know what you are capable of. And that truth demands more. The real reward isn't applause. It's the silence of a mind that no longer begs for permission. It's the stillness of a soul that no longer needs to be seen to feel real. It's the clarity of knowing you've been reduced to your essence and survived. There's no one left to impress. No need to perform. From this point forward, everything you build is yours. your values, your voice, your vision. You've stopped borrowing meaning and started forging it. You don't echo anymore, you originate. But here's the final challenge. Can you live with being misunderstood? Can you walk alone without folding? Can you hold your vision steady when the world mocks it, rejects it, punishes it? Can you keep your fire lit in a culture that fears anything it can't domesticate? Because that's the price of true transformation. You don't just lose comfort, you lose belonging. Nietzsche called it the will to power, not power over others, but power over self. The ability to command your impulses, to shape your instincts, to master the storm within without silencing it. Mastery, creation, sovereignty, not as concepts, but as daily disciplines. You become the architect of your identity, the blacksmith of your own fate. You are now the forge, the flame, and the sword. There's no finish line, no certificate, just a fire you choose to keep stoking, just a standard you refuse to lower. And the old you? The soft echo that once begged to be liked? It's ash. And that ash doesn't get to speak anymore. The new you doesn't explain, doesn't shrink, doesn't ask to be seen. It just walks forward, unapologetic, unbreakable, unstoppable.